a lot more people into our defenses than those that could actually make it into campus. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to share some of the work of our students more broadly. And I hope actually after this we develop more of a web presence to highlight some of our student work in addition to returning to an in-person format for our thesis defenses. So I want to, I'm Annette Watson, I'm the director of the program, and it's my honor to introduce as Luz Agudelo's advisor this particular project that she's been spending a lot of time and energy working on, called An Analysis of Community Resilience to Flood Hurricane Hazards in Charleston, South Carolina. I can attest that she's done a tremendous amount of work on this, and you're about to really enjoy hearing about really an important subset of the Charleston County population that we haven't yet heard too much about in all this talk of resilience. And so I'll leave my introduction at that. I'll leave it to Luz to lead us through her PowerPoint slides, and then after she's done presenting, if you guys could, those of you attending, be familiar with the raise hand function, and that's what we'll try and use to facilitate the Q&A, and I'll be able to see who raises their hands and call on those folks that have questions for Luz. And then once the public Q&A is complete, I will ask the non-committee members to leave this Zoom so we can get on with the committee end of things. So that's our procedure as we go. If anyone has any questions or issues, please feel free to use the chat function while Luz is doing her presentation. And with that, I will hand it over to Luz. Take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Watson. And thank you everybody for attending my thesis defense. My name is Luz Agudelo with the College of Charleston, and so I'm just gonna go ahead and start the presentation of my analysis of community resilience to flood and hazards in Charleston, South Carolina. Community resilience is a term that we hear very often, and I am going to explain this in the words of the National Research Council. Is the ability or capacity to prepare and plan for, absorb and recover from, and most successfully adapt to actual potential adverse events, which in this case are flood and hurricane hazards. Keep in mind these two words that I have underlined, ability and adaptation, because those two are going to be connected into the explanation of how vulnerability connects with resilience, and that's the view that we are going to have throughout the presentation. The order of my presentation is the research problem, my methods, how I investigated my, responded to my research problem, the results.
Wait, hold on, Luz, did you forward your slide, or is that, I'm sorry, did you forward your slide?
No, I haven't.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I thought we had a technical issue. I apologize.
Oh, okay. No, I'm still in the first one. I'm just explaining the order of my presentation. So it's research problem, methods, results, and policy recommendations. So now here we have the global scale of the problem. These are the impacts of flood coming from storm surge and hurricanes. We can see the location of Charleston County on the map. This is a map that I made for Matthew, October 2016. And the problem is consecutive years. Since 2015, we have a big event, disastrous event potentially. So 2015, we had the rainfall, heavy rainfall that flooded many of the streets in Charleston. And at the regional level, I'm gonna go ahead and show you what those global impacts come into the regional scale. So we had the 2015 rainfall, 2016 we had Matthew, 2017 we had Irma, 2018, 2019 we had other hurricane events. So that affected all of our region, and you can see here all of the 4-foot storm surge effects on the map. At the local scale, those global and regional problems come with vulnerability of the community. So the term vulnerability connects with my first term of community resilience, and the definition is the characteristics or circumstances of a person or a group that influence the capacity or ability to anticipate and recover from the impact of a natural hazard. We can see on the screen that we have homes impacted, roads impact, and stormwater systems impact. So all of these affects, of course, people. And the people of Charleston County is the center of my studies in my research. So for vulnerability, since we tied up the characteristics of a person or a group are the vulnerability factors, and the resilience is the system that supports these groups to be able to overcome and be better off or be in a good situation after the disaster. We are gonna look into the vulnerability factors. So the research that I made on my secondary data shows that low income is one of the main drivers. And I mentioned here some of the researchers and refer to also low self-protection measures and the heightened vulnerability of foreign-born Hispanics with the English language barriers, undocumented immigration status, etc. So all of these problems that I have established took me to my research questions. What are the vulnerabilities in Charleston County? That study has not been done so far in terms of the people of Charleston County. So is it ethnicity? If it's ethnicity, I wanted to compare the Hispanic group with the non-Hispanic group, which are my two groups that I studied in the comparison. Is it the driver, the language barriers, or household income? Is the housing, the hazard mitigation strategies, the preparedness plans, or a risk perception? What is it driving the local vulnerability of these groups in Charleston? These questions led me to the hypothesis. So I have 4 hypotheses, and my main hypothesis is a comparison between Hispanics and non-Hispanics and see if they have equal constellation of vulnerability factors. This is also complemented with my other hypothesis in terms of hazard mitigation strategies, socioeconomic status, and the risk perception and awareness of the flood and hurricane hazards. To be able to respond to my questions and test my hypothesis, I use the following methods. I have 2 methods. Like the large methods are secondary sources and primary sources. In the secondary sources, I use the census and literature review of risk researchers. And the primary sources, I used my structured questionnaire survey and a participatory geographic information exercise that I analyzed with the spatial analysis in GIS in the preparation and post GIS exercises. The sampling techniques mean how I recruited people. So the questionnaire survey, I recruited people for 3 months in different ways. I did convenience sampling because of the trade-offs of time, cost, and resources that I needed to have the balance to finish the project. And I deployed the English and Spanish surveys in the Qualtrics College of Charleston provided. I found that the most effective technique to recruit Hispanics was to fill out the surveys for them. So I targeted going to where I knew they were running errands, and along with them filling the surveys out. And I found a great advantage to be an American foreign-born researcher. I'm from Cali, Colombia. And that gave me an advantage to recruit my participants. For the PGIS group exercises, the last question of my survey asked participants if they wanted willingly to participate in my post exercises. And so the people that sign up or registered and say yes, I contacted them and did some of them, and ended up with 3 PGIS exercises where I had 21 participants, women and men. So here is my structured questionnaire survey, a portion of it, and you can see that I have an English version, and the English version was translated to the Spanish version in 2 iterations. I had 2 other people after me to review that the translation was correct. So the structured questionnaire survey, most of the work in the survey comes before it's deployed, because we have to analyze whether the score is that we are going to come out after the survey is gonna respond to the questions. So that's why you see a selection of the different questions that responded to the different tests that I was trying to do. And the testing is to hazard mitigation actions, again, risk perception and experience, reliance on social networking, and vulnerability factors, which brought me up to a vulnerability score individually. Next, the data analysis for my survey depended upon a coding that I used. With a yes response, they would get 1 point. For example, flood insurance, yes, I do have it. So that gives you 1 point. The higher the points, the less vulnerability. And then I tested in my 2 sample t-test, which is a numerical means to say, to use come up with the p-value, and that's just numerical. It doesn't tell me the story. And the 2 sample proportion test tells me how reliable, no, how confidence interval is my response data. And graphical analysis, which is a different way of comparing the 2 groups, and we'll see that a little bit in a moment. So here we have the participatory GIS. This is a photograph of one of my exercises. On the left side of the maps, you see that this map has no flood data. So this transparent sheet, it was located originally on the base map, and participants were able to locate their homes, work, where they shop for food, and the schools and parks, and areas that flooded. So all of that data, of course, was in my transparent sheet. We will move the transparent sheet into the 2 other flood data information. And after that, I will explain what I did in the next slide. But the objective of the participatory GIS is actually to understand the needs of the community. It is not to educate. So it's more about listening and discussing policy recommendations and the needs of the community. I had an advantage of sharing these flood scenarios created by the College of Charleston with the authorization of the Hazard Center and Dr. Levine as the lead, because that way I was able to share this information with the background of being a student there. So I used for the plan exploratory questions, which were essentially 3. When I moved from the base map to the flood maps, the flood maps create a response. So I asked, do the flood maps change your perception of risk? Give me 3 highest priority issues that you have. And what do you think about government and other people responding to these issues? So with that, I went back to the lab and plugged in all of this information on the maps, and you can see on the map the focus areas of issues and the overall map of the Charleston County. The participants placed the 4 color-coded, and that's what I analyzed with my research. So summary results. Are Hispanics really more vulnerable than non-Hispanics in Charleston County? The answer is yes. But there are also opportunities to make them more resilient. And that's part of the work that I got into to respond to my hypothesis. So my secondary data indicated that local Hispanic people in the landscape are distributed in the way that you see on this base map. So here we see concentrations of intense blue or a lighter color. That means that in the area where there is more intensity of the color, there are more concentration of the Hispanic population as of 2010. This is from the census data. And the lighter the concentration, the less people. So we can see on the left side of this graph, in 2000, according to the census, 2% of the population was Hispanic. It jumped to 5% in 2010, and then it has remained steady through the years. This is the same map, but with the mean high water, mean high water flood. It's not flooding, it's kind of a base map because it's the highest tide of the tidal movement of the ocean. We have 2 high tides and 2 low tides. So the mean high water is the high tide. And we can see how that intersects with the Hispanic population. Here we see also the Hispanic population embedded into the 4-foot storm surge scenario. And if you have any questions about that, we can go back later. So the local Hispanic people, and continuing with the local people's information, by race in 2018, self-defined, 80% of them self-defined as white. 14% self-defined as some other race, and 4% 2 or more races. Here are the results of my survey data. I collected in total 230 surveys, 100% completed. From the Hispanic population, I collected 74 surveys, and from the non-Hispanic group, I collected 156. I'm gonna now show briefly some of the graphics that I used to analyze the comparison of these 2 groups. Starting with the household income, that's a very important vulnerability factor. And we can see here that most of our Hispanic group earns less than $50,000, whereas the ethnic group of non-Hispanics earn more than $50,000. Here the Hispanic respondents by place of birth. This is a comparison. Both figures are, both columns are Hispanics, but 89% of my participants were foreign born. That compares to the 47% that established foreign borns in 2010 in Charleston County. This is the English proficiency of foreign-born Hispanics in Charleston County. This is from my data. And you can see here that about roughly about 50% have limitations with the English language. And so the English proficiency is a factor that we'll look into later on. This is a response to the concern with hurricanes in Charleston County. You can see the concern really picks up into the being extremely concerned among the two groups. And so this is one of the issues that we are looking into very heavily in Charleston County. For the evacuation behavior, I found very interesting that Hispanics have more tendency to say, yes, I will evacuate and follow government evacuation orders, whereas the non-Hispanics are more in the tendency to say, no, I would not. And I had a very interesting group, kind of high, that responded sometimes. So I wanted to look into sometimes people, why they don't evacuate. And the cited reasons why people don't evacuate are shown in this graph. Briefly, there are 3 major reasons people evacuate sometimes, and those are storm category, storm track, and inconveniences of evacuating. So it's kind of balancing out, and that's why people wait to later to make sure that it is worth to evacuate. So here we see the flood frequency 2 blocks from home, and we notice most of my participants do not have issues with flooding within 2 blocks of their house. Between 0 and 1 was the response. And so that takes us to the level of concern with flooding in the neighborhood is relatively low too. As we can see, the highest peak of the trend line is in the not concern, higher on the somewhat concern. Here's a very important comparison of people living in a mobile home. This is a comparison between, again, the Hispanics and non-Hispanics. And we can see that 38% of my participants live in mobile homes, whereas only 2% of non-Hispanics live in a mobile home. And the opposite on the side of the no response. Here is another difference that I found interesting. The percentage keeping emergency cash is about the same response for both groups, but the difference lays on the cash, the amount of cash saved for emergencies. Most of my participants from the non-Hispanic responded that they saved more than $1,000, whereas the Hispanics responded they save less than $1,000. And even higher at the range between $100 and $400. So here are some of the analysis that I did in reference to my hypothesis. This is an explanation, or I'm showing here the box plot of Hispanics and versus non-Hispanics demonstrates that the mean scenario of my Hispanics is lower than the mean of the non-Hispanics in terms of vulnerability. So what I did before this to prepare for the statistical analysis was to come up with a vulnerability score with the 1 and 0 that I have already explained, and combine them together to come up with the response to my hypothesis. So the result gave me the Hispanics are more vulnerable to flood and hurricane hazards than the non-Hispanic. Here are my dependent variables. The dependent variables are the factors that demonstrate vulnerability when they are present in a community. And so you can see that there is a constellation of vulnerabilities that are mostly focused on the Hispanic side rather than on the non-Hispanic side. The high renter occupancy and reliance on social networks and ability of the renter to get home flood insurance, and all of these factors are, I'm not gonna get too much in detail into them, but they are part of that constellation of vulnerabilities that make the Hispanics more exposed or vulnerable. My hypothesis too, this table shows the group of different testing scenarios that I did to be able to respond to the question of hazard mitigation strategies. In red, I have marked what makes the Hispanic group or the non-Hispanic group more vulnerable, and we can see that most of the percentages are on the Hispanic group side. It's a way to see quickly that there is more vulnerability on the Hispanics. For example, flood insurance home coverage. 46% of the Hispanic group have flood insurance, which is less than the non-Hispanic group in the 60%. So now we are gonna go into the results of my PGIS data. After the exercises that I went back to the GIS lab, I plugged in all of the data that I had collected into a map, and this is what I found. So you can see that the blue are the houses, the yellow are the playgrounds, and different colors indicate whether there is work or school points. So now my participatory GIS exercises gave me these summary results that I show in this page. The individual interest to protect personal data comes sometimes in conflict with the common well-being of the community. For example, I had somebody, a Puerto Rican person, that because of the experience they have there, when he purchased the property, he made it fill up with soil, so he was able to let the water run out of his property. And then now 30 years later, his surrounding neighbors have issues with flooding because of this. So I also found that there are concerns with the stress and material losses and preoccupation with how they are gonna get water, food, gas, and how they're gonna move across political boundaries and different roads. Also, they have been able to witness the issues with filling of swamps to be able to accommodate development, especially in the West Ashley area. And I also found that being bilingual has been a great benefit for me to communicate with my PGIS participants. So here we have a testimonial from one of my participants. It's a family in James Island that they expressed in Spanish, but I'm gonna translate, or I translate for you here, is that they are concerned with the road closures and the island being isolated from the rest of the continental area. So the first thing that I think, said this person, is that we are gonna be incommunicated. That's one of the cases that are very interesting to see. Another case is that this person said, trabajo en construcción. I work in construction, so I go where my company sends me, where they have the projects. So we did a scenario here where he showed me that he lives, like you can see here on the top is in the North Charleston area. He travels with two others doing carpooling and taking turns to carpool. He goes across all the way, and in this case, he was working on a project in Kiwa Island, and we are gonna see how that changes. This scenario changes completely and makes very difficult for him to go to his work. So his concern when he sees this is that his family depends on his earnings. My family depends on my earnings. My wife works, but her income is not enough for us to maintain the family. So all of this data that I collected throughout my project gave me some major findings, and here is the summary. Families of the Hispanic community are more vulnerable and not exactly less resilient sometimes, but they need more support from the system to be able to overcome the vulnerability factors that I have just explained. And that's when the policy recommendations come. Hispanics are more vulnerable. When I compare the vulnerability scores individually, it is also in my sample. I saw that they have fewer flood and hurricane hazard mitigation strategies, and also that they earn less than $50,000 in a family, in an entire household family. In addition to that, the more Hispanics live in mobile homes. They tend to follow evacuation orders, but they are probably challenged in the way that how many times they are gonna be able to really evacuate if they don't have enough income. And the Hispanic population is grown in numbers, but it's usually represented in the governmental reports in percentage. So if you see that in 2010, 5% of the population was Hispanic, and now it's 5%, it looks as if it's really not growing. But if you see the numbers, right now it's about around 20,000 Hispanics in the community, and those are families that are being affected by all of these issues. And one of the biggest findings is that Hispanics lack representation through voices who speak for their needs and support them in sharing their knowledge. So here comes my policy recommendations after having all of these study analysis. My first one is train ambassadors. These ambassadors, if they are organized in a way that they serve as a communicators between the community and government, they are gonna be able to translate the information for them. These ambassadors can have a liaison in government that is the connection between them and government. Also, strengthen emergency outreach programs for vulnerable populations, including Spanish-speaking only people, through these trained ambassadors. Another recommendation is to visually communicate the emergency information in infographics, so to avoid language barriers of this huge population that is foreign born and have English language limitations to communicate. Map the underrepresented communities to create formal and accountable outreach programs. So enhance Hispanic representation. Some local governments are talking about resiliency plans. It would be important to bring representation while developing the plans, and then specifying a criteria for the programs, how we are gonna know that these programs are being really successful. How does a successful program looks like? And have all of this pre-work on the program to be able to have metrics of success of the programs. Also foment repetitive management processes. So we start with a management process and then we refine it as we go. We don't have to have it perfect from the beginning, but have ways to measure how the progress is getting into something more formal to be successful. And also ensure a mixed candidate of ambassadors. These ambassadors are central to this communication. Also, I found that the social networks and mass media actually works well in Charleston County. So those are entry points to reach out to the community. Enhance support for hazard risk literacy and to be able to have communication programs through the faith and school institutions. Very important to include diverse people in the resiliency plans and processes. Local government policies are not including diversity in the planning of these programs. And so these are folks traditionally involved in the planning process that are talking about resilience of a diversity community without the diverse people. This is important to have the diverse community in the plan, included in the plan. All of these recommendations are based on the leadership and adaptive governance concepts that guide these policies recommendations. And with this, we have gone through my thesis defense, and I thank you so much for your support. And I am really thankful to all of these people that have supported me throughout my presentation and also my work in school. Thank you. And now I turn it over.
Luz, thank you so much. Certainly, yeah, let's hear, so we could hear some applause. That's good too. What a fabulous job. I'll be facilitating this public Q&A, and certainly the committee members are welcome to join in. Before we start the Q&A, I will announce that Luz was one of our selected students to receive outstanding graduate student amongst our graduating class this year. So congratulations on that as well. This is a great opportunity for me to announce that more broadly.
Thank you.
You've done some great work. And so, okay, if folks could utilize the hand raise function, I could call on anybody that has a question or comment for Luz on this work.
Also, if people are having issues with the hand raise function, you can send a chat in directly to Annette to just say that you have a question.
Yep, that works too. So I wonder, I'll just start off before I see anybody else chime in. Could you talk just a little bit more about the process of reaching out to the Hispanic community, and certainly your positionality provides a good access to that, and just tell us, how long it took you, though, still, nevertheless, to reach out to folks.
In total, it was about 5 months. I started doing some work before I actually deployed the survey in Qualtrics, just talking with who would be willing to support this work. And so before I deployed it, I had already some positive responses from nonprofit organizations in the Hispanic community. And some people personally had asked me, yes, I will be willing to do it. So I started at least 2 months before my deployment, survey deployment, to make a list of the people who were interested, getting their emails together, getting their phone, because many of my reaching out was through texts, which I found that was very interesting. I sent 50 texts to people who had been giving me that information instead of an email. I sent about 200 emails and asked people to put the link of my survey and explain the survey in the social media. So I am unable to say the percentage effectiveness of all of these contacts, but after a month being into the deployment, I saw that my numbers of Hispanics were very low in comparison to my target. So I decided to be proactive with the paper surveys. I distributed them to churches and community centers and libraries and posted flyers, and the response was really not that much. So that's how I started to just go to the grocery stores that I knew I could target some people and I could recognize, especially targeting Hispanic people, because it was more difficult to have those 74 surveys completed. So as they were doing their errands, I asked them, and they said, if you fill it out, I'll respond to the question. So I just fill it out for them, and they went back to the Qualtrics and fill out the information to have a congregated data.
Thank you. I mean, obviously, I know how much effort you put into recruitment in this particular study, and so it was good to give you some opportunity to explain that process a little more. We do have a question from Louise.
Hey, I know you mentioned that Hispanics are more likely to evacuate when being told to evacuate. Is that right? Did I hear that correctly?
Correct.
But do you think, that kind of surprises me, because typically, especially being also, you know, an immigrant, in my experience, there seems to be a lot of kind of institutional reticence, that they're unlikely to trust institutions. Do you think that that's the case for the Hispanic community in Charleston, or maybe I've misread that?
Thank you for that question. It's a very good question, actually. The findings that I have, I am not able to say that they represent the entire community in Charleston County, but I do want to say to this question is that the Hispanics are more likely to evacuate because they are not familiar with how to handle hurricanes in a coastal area. When we are here, since I live in Charleston County, and there is a storm coming up in the way that you saw on the map, it's coming up and it's a threat that everybody's expecting, and the news are showing the risks that we have with the hurricane. When the hurricane arrives, if it's category 3 or 4, it can be devastating. And so mentally, it's difficult to comprehend or to adapt to that when you are not used to the process. We have some people, not only the Hispanic community, but in general, people from other states coming into this area that are not really familiar. And that's the explanation that I have, not from my survey exactly, but from the observations that I made, that the unfamiliarity of these risks made people want to evacuate. But really, how many times these people can evacuate? That's the question.
Thanks. Did you have any follow-up to that, or was that good?
No, that's great. Thank you.
All right.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, I think it was a great question, actually.
Yeah.
Anyone else have a question? No one else I don't see any indication at the moment. I'm going to give another moment or two. Any other questions for Luz?
The advantage I see with the questions is that refine the problem and refine the findings. So I don't mind if I have any questions, and even if I am unable to respond right now, I would be interested in looking into that and getting back to you if you have anything that sounds a little bit out of the normal.
Well, yeah, we'll be looking forward to hearing more about the reporting of this coming out. Okay, last chance for questions from anyone in the audience here. Okay, with that, congratulations, and the public can give your applause, and then we'll have to say goodbye to the public. Just the public.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you can make us.